my presentation, as I stated before, is about the justice of climate change and the issues surrounding this. That's not where it is. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to play a little clip of some music and just take time to listen to it and really imagine a life where this is the kind of music that you would hear.
Am I going there?
No, I have it. So most people now agree that climate change is a real threat to our existence. But what we don't agree on is who is responsible for fixing it. So this was a short clip of music from the traditional Maldivian music. So the Maldives is one of the island nations that is at high risk of disappearing in the next few decades due to direct issues from climate change, rising sea levels. So, to begin, I would like to give a quick overview of what climate change is, or what the definition that we will be focusing on today. So, if you don't believe that climate change is real, I still want you to participate, learn and voice your opinions in the activity at the end of the presentation. So, learn from everything and we'll discuss that a bit later. So, I will define climate change as the change in global or regional climate patterns, in particular a change apparent from the mid to late 20th century onwards, attributed largely to the increased levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide produced from the use of fossil fuels. So here we can see a graph of the annual average temperatures in the world from the 1800s to present day. So we can see a clear increase here of average temperature. So let's take a look at what that could be coming from, or first, the impacts of it. So according to an ongoing analysis conducted by NASA, the average global temperature on the Earth has already increased 1.4 Fahrenheit, which is 0.8 Celsius, since the 1880s. So in the next few decades, the Earth is estimated to rise another Fahrenheit, So that is an incredible rise in the next few years, which will have strong effects. So one thing I'd like to point out is that major weather and fires and natural disasters are not caused by climate change. However, there's no question that that climate change does not impact them, make them worse, make them more frequent, and basically make them more intense across the world. So a few months ago, we've had hurricanes, always we've had hurricanes, and they've been getting worse and more frequent, especially near the southern coast of the United States. We've had droughts in California and fires across more than 9 states in the western United States. So now the question is, what causes climate change? The answer is actually pretty simple: fossil fuels. So yes, there's fluctuation here. We can see there are rises and declines. However, it is clear that there has been a drastic increase over the past 70 years of carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. So what causes fossil fuels? We take a look at transportation and electricity as the 2 largest factors. So transportation is anything from planes to cars to buses to anything that we use that uses gas. Now this releases carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere, which thickens this atmospheric wall, right? And so the sun, right, is up here, let's pretend. There are beams that are going to go into our atmosphere. That is natural, right? We go in, that's how the Earth is heated. However, as this atmospheric level increases due to the amounts of carbon dioxide and other fossil fuels, the beams aren't going to be able to bounce back off of the Earth into the into space. They're going to stay stuck in our atmosphere, which causes climate change, or the global warming as well. So electricity and industry. So we live in a society that is very dependent on industrial systems, electricity. I mean, much like this building that we're standing in right now. We have heating, cooling, everything imaginable, lighting, everything that we use in our life has electricity and industry for the most part. So first we'll take a look at the measurable impact of climate change, what we have already seen happen in the world. So this is a map that shows the global temperature trend from from the 1900s to 2014. So we can see a drastic increase of temperature change. So in the red areas, it's about 3 degrees Fahrenheit per century change. So this averages to the global 1.4 that we spoke about before. However, if you imagine 3 degrees, it might not seem too different. But if you sit in a room or you're outside in the summer, it's 80 degrees, or maybe 86. And then if it goes up 3 degrees, 89 degrees, you will feel a difference. And that is now the average that we feel, which also impacts the highs and the lows of everything, of all of the temperatures. So now we look at the future. What is to come in respect to climate change? So here we see a graph, a map of the likelihood that the average summer temperatures will exceed the highest on record. So the average summer temperature in Indiana is 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and the highs are usually around 116. So according to this, in 2050, we'll see some fluctuation, we'll see some change. However, by 2090, we see in Indiana, it is a 70 to 90% chance that 116 degrees Fahrenheit will now become the new average. By these calculations, there could be highs above 150 degrees. Now, this is completely, no life can live in Indiana especially, in 150 degrees. Plants won't grow. We'll have drought, we'll have famine. This is our future if change is not made. So, the costs of, climate change reparations. So in, so in the coming decade, economic losses from extreme weather combined with the health costs of pollution, such as air pollution and things like this, spiral upward to at least $360 billion annually in the United States, potentially crippling U.S. economic growth. So the sad truth is that the poorest countries on the planet will be hit first by these effects of global warming and climate change. In the last decade, it is the poor countries like Honduras, Myanmar, Nicaragua, Bangladesh, and Thailand that have become the most battered by the climate storm. So where will the money come from to fix this? That is one of the most important questions that is discussed in regards to climate change. So we look at who's polluting. So we see who's polluting. We see the 2 darkest countries on this map, which is 5 million emissions by this scale, the United States and China. Now that might not come to a surprise to many of you. We know that the United States, we produce a lot of fossil fuels. We are a big country, and so is China. However, here on the left, or right, you're right, we see per capita, so that's emissions per person. So in China, there are so many people that their pollutions actually per capita even out. So we see that the United States even surpasses China when it's per capita. That means that we are emitting so many fossil fuels per person in the United States that we are the worst in the world when it comes to perpetrators in regards to climate change. Now, who are the victims here? We look at the South, the exact ones that were not contributing to this idea of climate change and fossil fuel emitters. We see developing countries. We see countries like, in Africa, this is where we see the most. 10. They are extremely vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And they're not even the ones who are directly attributing to it. So, the big idea in regards to social justice is who should do something, or who should pay. So the United Nations has been dealing with this issue for many years, and many discussions have been about this. So we are going to have a quick simulation of, we're going to debate. And everyone is going to have a different role. Some are going to be industrialized countries, some will be developing, some will be developed, and some will be oceanic nations. So we're going to get into groups of 4, and you're going to try to discuss a plan for how to pay, or who should pay, for climate change. And we'll see how that turns out, and we'll talk a bit more after that. So I'm going to count out by 4s. 1s will be the rich industrial countries. So these are the mixed opinions. I have some ideas for you going off. So these are countries like the United States, Japan, the European Union, Israel, Australia, these countries. Then we'll have twos are the island nations with low elevation, including the Maldives, which we heard the music from earlier. And this also includes Florida, where 1 million houses are severely threatened in the 21st century. Threes will be the developing countries. These are countries like China, India, Mexico, Brazil, and most African countries. So here we have a quote from a journal saying, voicing a few opinions from China. And fours will be representatives of the fossil industry, who often state that they are part of the solution and not the problem. Okay, so I'm going to count off, and then every group of four, so I'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, you'll be a group, and you will try to debate. Won't. Even if you do, we'll discuss possible solutions. Okay, group 1, do you guys have a solution? Do all countries agree on this solution? No? Okay, no. Do you guys have a solution? Yes? Okay. Okay. Do you guys have a solution?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. There's solutions. Okay, do you have a solution? Yes? And the group behind them?
Yes.
You have a solution. Wonderful. Okay, over here, do you guys have a solution? No? What about you guys? Yeah, you have a solution? You guys? Yes? Awesome. And you guys back there have a solution. That's wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to ask a few students to share what their solutions were in this, and let's discuss this and maybe break it down, find some negatives, find some positives, see if this could work on the global level. So is anyone comfortable with presenting? Yes, back there.
So, our idea was have Africa start producing all the food for the entire world because there's a lot of open space there, and then the people there would have jobs and food, and the rest of the world would be happy.
So how does this So yes, I mean in a sense that
all of the factories that would be newly built in Africa would be very eco-friendly, and all the old ones that are very poor for the environment would be destroyed or changed into a habitat.
So who's going to pay for this?
Yeah.
All the world countries, because they're all going to be getting their food from there anyway.
Okay, so
everyone
who
has to
in
pay.
this group is the developed country, the big industrial country? Okay, do you agree with this? Do you think that you should pay to make eco-friendly factories in Africa?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, why?
I don't know.
Okay, see, this is an issue that we run into a lot in these, in the UN meetings. Many of the larger countries don't want to pay for, wait, do I have this? Yes, okay, so I have that. Okay, many of the larger countries don't want to have to pay. You know, they say it's a global issue. However, then when the developing countries say, okay, well, I didn't do anything to help invoke this, and you should pay, because countries like the United States and China, they're the ones who have had the most, you know, emissions. So that kind of bounces back and forth. The big countries say, oh, it's a global issue. We don't have to pay. We're not the only ones. And then the developing countries say, well, you kind of are, you know? Like, you're the really big perpetrators here. Does anyone else want to share their, yeah?
So the solution that we came up with was that, of course, the problem isn't just going to be solved by throwing money at it, but money definitely helps.
Right.
And countries should be held responsible for their contribution to the problem with regards to their levels of development. So a country's contribution to solving the problem would be measured by their level of development and their contribution to the problem. So that a country like Bangladesh doesn't have to pay as much as a country like the United States. Because Bangladesh hasn't contributed as much to the problem, and frankly, they just can't pay as much as the United States could.
Yeah, okay, so that is also a fair point. And so again, I would say, in the sense of a United Nations meeting, would one of these larger countries oppose to them having to pay more? Probably, just because they don't want to pay. Nobody wants to pay. Money is one of the largest factors driving why we haven't found a solution to climate change. Money runs this world, really, in the sense of getting things done. And large countries don't want to pay, small countries don't want to pay. So this, again, is the idea that what's going to happen, if we can't find a solution. So possible responses. So we have, again, like I've said a few times, we have the idea from the developing countries who say that, here we have in this graph here, we see that the United States and other developed countries have released exponentially more emissions than developing countries, and that the developing countries should not have to pay for this reparation. And then we also have the argument from the developed countries who say, oh, it's a global, right? It's a global thing. We are all in this together. We all have to pay. It's not just us. And then we have the industrialized countries who are saying, okay, so we are helping to build things that are going to help the environment. They often say, oh, we're going to, build technology that's going to help. One of the most recent Nobel Peace Prize winners, or the Nobel Prize winners, says, okay, let's just build technology that's going to help climate change. We don't have to deal with it now. The technology will take care of it. So, this is not really a plausible situation because action is needed now. Now is the time that we change, the things that are going to happen from these increased levels. And finally, we have the oceanic countries, the island nations. Their only goal, they want to survive. Rising ocean levels are going to take over so many of these countries, Maldives only being one of them. So we see so many traditions, so many lives, and everything just lost to the ocean, all because of climate change. So, towards a solution. So, the key issue that I'd like to stress is that an agreement has to be made around the world. In these United Nations meetings, everyone has to agree or nothing will be done. It also seems reasonable to think about causation, right? Some countries have, helped more, some have not, right? So the United States recently pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. So a first step toward a solution. What we did in class. The stakeholders, they have to get together, like in these UN meetings, and they have to talk to each other. They have to really sit down and not only discuss the financial and everything like this, which is important, they have to discuss the future of our lives as a country, as a nation, as a world. So, so one innovative way that has been proposed is the idea of carbon trading. Has anyone heard of this concept? Yeah? Okay. So, carbon trading is the idea that countries or states or companies are able to emit a certain amount of gases, so for example, carbon dioxide, but if they want to go beyond that, they have to buy it from other countries. They have to buy some of theirs. Now, this would cut the other countries' emissions, and if this market-based system works as it's supposed to, it's an effective, cost-effective way of cutting overall emissions. However, many people have actually compared this to the Roman Catholic medieval practice of allowing individuals to pay money to reduce punishment for a sin. So this is the idea that you can just, you can throw money at something and it will go away. Your problems will go away with money. This also brings up the economic issue of developing countries do not have the money to give to this, which also brings up the idea, another idea that developing countries give. These developed countries were able to go through their industrial revolutions much before this, much before we even thought of climate change as an issue. They were allowed to use as many emissions as they want to build this industrial, nation as we are, for example, in the United States, as China is, and many others. The developing countries often argue that they aren't allowed to do that. They say it's unfair. We're trying to build up our industry, but we're not allowed to because we have these carbon cuts. So this is why we need a solution that helps not only the developing countries, not only the developed countries, not even only the oceanic countries, and not even only the industrial countries, but it helps the world as a whole. So again, I'd like to stress, We need a solution. And this demonstration that we had in class is the perfect way to do it. This is what we need to do as a world, not only in a class setting, not only in a country, but all together in these United Nations meetings. This is what has to happen. Thank you.